I'm Tom Baker, this is Chasing Cars, and today should be one of the most interesting days of the year because this is the Tesla Model 3. It's the first time the Model 3 has been available to drive here on Australian soil. Even though other markets have had Teslas third effort at a real serious production car for some time, it's brand new to Australia and super exciting for me because this is actually the first Tesla that we've covered on Chasing Cars, so I'm going to be learning stuff today as well. I'm sure a lot of people who are real Tesla aficionados are going to see this video and will be able to add your insights down below. And while you're there, make sure to hit subscribe and the notification bell so you never miss one of our full-length Australian video car reviews. But one reason the Tesla Model 3 is going to be really important for the Australian market is that it continues to bring more affordable options in terms of full EVs. So recently you and I had a look at the Hyundai Kona electric together, about 420 k's of range and 60 grand. This thing starts at $66,000 and offers about 450, 460 kilometers of range. So, there's another option at that level of the market. This particular car here on the big 20-inch wheels, and it's very fetching hue of red, is a Model 3 Performance. Serious pace available out of this car, range in the 560 kilometer zone. And there is actually a version of the Model 3 called the Long Range, which will sit in between, that offers over 600 k's of range. So there you go. But what I'm interested in is what is this Tesla like inside and what's it like to drive? And that's why I've brought it here to a private test track just outside Sydney. But what I want to do is I want to check out the interior of this very, very important new electric car because it's quite groundbreaking in many ways. So, frameless doors, they're kind of cool. Now in here, anybody that's seen the Tesla Model 3 in action before will know what we're in for because this is a very, very minimal interior. So we've got a really large 15-inch display mounted like a tablet here in the center, and that's about it. Apart from this small, thick, meaty steering wheel, that's cool. There's no traditional instrument cluster ahead of the car. It's a very, very minimal and pared back interior. Now, you'll either love that or loathe it. I personally don't mind, but I think I will need a little bit longer to get used to having all of the critical functions really in this display, including stuff like the speedometer, which is kind of over here. So you find yourself kind of casting your eyes or your head left to view the speed. If you've had a Model 3 for a while, if you've gotten used to it, let me know down below what you think of that feature. But we've got really, really nice, beautiful mapping here, and you are able to sort of tap through all of the key functions of the car. You can open up the front, because of course, being an electric car, it's no combustion engine up front. It's the front boot or the front trunk. You can move the steering wheel, and there's such minimal controls. You really have to control so many of the functions, including the autopilot semi-autonomous capability through the wheel. So that's kind of fascinating. But I reckon with familiarity and with time, you'd get used to that. All the climate controls, etc. are there as well. However, you do have really primary stuff like your directional selector, reverse drive. They're not really gears in this car, they're directions, and your indicators and wipers here on physical stalks. Now, you get nice, plush, comfortable seats. They actually remind me a bit of Mazda seats, but a bit plusher. Very, very white leather in this car. I reckon these would be hell to take care of, but you can also get black. They're comfortable though, they're supportive. They are set a little higher than expected. There's a wide range of electric adjustment. As for practicality, it's good because there's no mechanical stuff to get in the way of storage space. So we've got large bins here in the center that are magnetized. I keep forgetting they're magnetized, but they are. Just a small tray under the armrest there, but the driving position is okay. It feels quite nicely set. Lots of plush, soft touch materials, and build quality in this car actually feels okay. Certainly better than the Tesla Model S was. What about room in the back? Let's find out. Electric release to open the door. Now Tesla say that by moving that dash componentry forward, they were able to move the front seats forward by about 18 mil and therefore make this back seat bigger. And it's been fairly successful. Sitting behind myself, my legroom's okay. Headroom, not a lot of it. I've got about half an inch of headroom underneath this pretty stunning piece of glass. Now I can see the sky easily. That's kind of cool. However, anybody that's taller than me will be touching the glass. And the other thing is that we're actually in midwinter here in Australia right now, but that sunbeam actually comes through fairly strongly. So I'm interested to see how it performs in mid-summer. Now, I've got no tow room. That is one thing I'll note. If the driver has their seat as low as possible, what I like to do, there's no tow room here in the second row, basically. But you could get a third person because there's absolutely no hump in the floor because there's no drive shaft tunnel or anything like that. There's an independent electric motor on the rear axle for this car's all-wheel drive system. You do have air vents. You do have USB ports back here. That's cool. And a flip-down armrest with 2 cup holders. So, as for practicality and comfort, it's not too bad, but you can see my legs are fairly elevated in the air. What we need to do, though, is check out the conventional hatch or boot on this car, because although it looks like a hatchback, it's not. Instead, we have this kind of high opening boot deck lid thing, revealing a very large boot. No spare wheel on the Model 3, there's no spare wheel on any Tesla, but you do have a huge amount of space back here. You got underfloor storage as well. Those back seats fold completely flat. Plus you got that front boot, or frunk as Tesla call it. So I'm betting you can pack more into this car than say a BMW 3 Series. So what is the Tesla Model 3 like to drive? Well, as I mentioned up front, this is actually my first ever time driving a Tesla. So I'm really excited. Obviously, like them or loathe them, these cars have been huge game changers for the car industry. Pretty successful, I reckon, at making EVs cool. And the third effort, the Model 3, really ought to be pretty good by now, because what Tesla have done is they've hired throughout the industry, a bunch of people that really know what they're doing with vehicle engineering. And whoa, apart from the initial shock of just how fast the Model 3 performance variant is, yeah, it actually feels like a pretty well sorted sports sedan to me. So as I mentioned, this is the performance. So we've got the 75 kilowatt hour battery pack here with the dual motor setup, and it's a very, very punchy system, making 335 kilowatts of power. And given that that's just over 90 grand here in Australia, that's pretty good bang for buck. We're talking about, this is the Tesla M3, but we're talking about BMW M3 sort of outputs from this car for, a lot less money. Now, I'm not going to lie to you and say that this feels like a BMW M3 or a Mercedes AMG C63S to drive, because it doesn't. What it feels like to me is actually sort of more back in the day when those German manufacturers built a V8 powered sedan, but it was more luxury orientated. The Model 3 is actually fairly plush. The body control is decent, but you can feel that there's over 1,800 kilograms of mass happening in this vehicle, and so the stability control does have to do some work to keep that in check. Now you can turn that off and dial it down in track mode, which lets the car get much more entertaining and oversteery, but left in normal mode, it feels very, very neutral and actually relatively benign to drive, excepting the fact that it's properly quick. So, punch out of corners is phenomenal. Everybody knows that, kind of the going idea around electric cars is that they're extremely fast. That was $160, and it's still very, very quiet and refined in here. But the Model 3 performance is actually a very, very quick four-door car. It's quite addictive. Naturally, driving it at 10/10 does deplete the battery very quickly. We're at a private test track facility here, and we're finding that it actually uses 10 times more of its energy on track work than on the road. So as long as you're prepared for that, if you're going to do track work with the car, then you'll be in the right frame of mind. Now, naturally, most Model 3 buyers are not going to be taking the car to the track, and they'll just be enjoying the pleasant dynamics on the road. And in those locations, the Model 3, fares really nicely. It's got good steering. It's definitely mid-weighted. I can sense sort of some aspects of an Audi steering rack feel in this car, except it's a bit quicker. So it's a really, really low rack ratio, actually, as Tesla are at pains to point out. So the front end is quite darty. It wants to turn in. We're on Michelin Pilot Sport 4 tyres here, and we are noticing a fairly high rate of wear as the cars are being used on track. It's because they're pretty heavy. The brakes in the performance are better. In the standard range plus that I was driving earlier, yeah, you could certainly feel the brakes wearing out rather quickly with repeated hard stops. But once again, these complaints, meter out considerably when you think about driving the car on a road environment. The suspension, can't really tell because the facility that we're driving on here doesn't have any bumps. I'm told that the 20-inch wheels of the Performance make the ride a little firmer, a little more choppy on Australian roads, but I'll have to wait until I can take the car to where I like to drive to find out. But, we'll see. You can get smaller wheels if you don't go for the Performance, so that's one thing to consider. And the refinement is pretty good. There's a little bit of wind noise and tyre noise at 100, 110 k's an hour, but below that, it's a very, very quiet place to be. The visibility is also incredible. You're sat quite high, and of course, because there's not an instrument cluster in front of you, you've got a really good view of the road. Glasshouse is big, mirrors are quite big. Now the safety features, we're going to have to check those out in real-world driving situations where there's actual other cars we can interact with in our path. But the Model 3 does have all of the hardware features required for full self-driving, but you do have to option up that package. Now I'm at pains to mention that Tesla call it full self-driving. Full self-driving is not a thing that exists in the car industry right now. There is not the regulatory environment, nor is there the degree of technology and data required to make it happen. But in future, there's a very high chance that Tesla products and cars from other brands will be on the leading edge of a higher degree of autonomous driving. But it is cool that the Model 3 is fitted out with all of those sensors already. So those are my first impressions of the Tesla Model 3. This is a really impressive addition to the EV landscape. It's more affordable than many other premium electric cars. Now, $66,000 isn't cheap, but it does bring this longer range EV more into the reach of normal Australians, and I think that's really important. And there's also cars to consider like the Hyundai Kona Electric, and naturally if you're buying a car like the Model 3 simply for the size and style, then combustion options like the BMW 3 Series are also worth considering. But I mean, that's not full electric, it's just so different. But we will be putting up those cars into a comparison that I'm really looking forward to. So to make sure you see that, make sure you subscribe down below. And as always, thanks for watching Chasing Cars.